Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 2 of Beyond the Board. I'm Colleen Johnson, CEO of ProKanban.org, and today I'm joined by Jack Arndt from Platform Science. Jack, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Super excited to have you here today. We're going to be digging into some of your rollout of Kanban and scaling in particular at the organization that you work for. But a little bit of background about you and that company first and how you came to the ProKanban community. I met Jack through Slack, our open Slack community, and you were posting, I think, some of the metrics, honestly, that you had kind of before and after success metrics sharing with the community there in Slack. And I went, oh my gosh, more people need to hear Jack's story. How do we get you a platform for that? And that's what brought Jack to this group and to this audience today. So welcome, Jack.
Thank you so much. So yeah, a little bit of info about me. My name is Jack Arndt. I'm the senior manager of agility at a company called Platform Science. So we're an IoT company in the transportation space. Our motto is we want to connect everything that moves. And from my perspective, for my role, what that kind of means is that I kind of work in like a nightmare level difficulty agility setup where we got virtually every flavor of teams all working together to deliver value. We got apps teams and platform teams, hardware teams, data. We got a lot of teams. And I came here, actually I just hit 6 years last week. So I came here 6 years ago and the teams were doing a bit of a kind of like a Scrum waterfall kind of thing. It wasn't the most productive or predictable cadence. So I taught myself Kanban actually, and then I taught them Kanban. Within 4 months, we had throughput up across the board about 40%, and that's been pretty great. And then from there, the past 2 years, I've been focusing on really visualizing and optimizing our portfolio management. It's been an awesome ride though.
Yeah, I'm so excited to hear this story. So a few more questions around the organization itself. And so you said that varying levels kind of where everybody started. Did every team have its own scrum master or coach, or was this did you have to do all this work?
All right, so we were, this is a great question. So we were, it was a little 50-person shop. We're way bigger now. We're at 1,200 people as of 2 weeks ago.
Wow.
And it was just, there was one scrum master. He had 5 teams and he was moving to Australia. So I came in, 5 teams is kind of a gnarly ratio for a scrum master, but the folks here are pretty cool and they seemed well-versed in the self-organizing department. So I was like, yeah, let me give it a shot. And I'm here, I'm with these 5 teams and they were all doing basically the same flavor of Scrum. It was 2 weeks of QA and dev, and then they had this 3rd week called planning week.
If you can call that Scrum.
I'd never heard of planning week in the agile literature.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I mean, it sounds like there's obviously some challenges associated with that. Were the challenges that you were seeing with kind of that waterfall setup for their sprints?
Gosh.
You and being like, oh, there's something wrong here? Or what other challenges were they having?
It's funny. So planning week would start with a mini kickoff. Product would describe the vision. And then the team would, in theory, spend the week writing specs and planning. And then we would do pointing poker on Friday. And we'd quickly realize we didn't actually have capacity to do all the stuff. We just spent a week planning. Then you do the 2 weeks dev and QA. Didn't deliver everything you thought you would. Now the next planning week's coming up. And I guess we got to finish the in-flight work and do the planning week. And usually an incident would come up and you'd feel really bad. And yeah, it was tough. It was a tough one.
Right. And that cycle, I mean, there's so many things to dig into there and probably a lot of people that have experienced similar patterns. But, if QA can't keep up with that pace, then they're starting to fall behind if they can't get through all that testing in the 2 weeks, their 2 week sprint of testing. Yeah. And I would imagine that as they find defects, then how do you prioritize those when the development team has already moved on to the next batch of work, right?
Yeah, there were a lot of challenges in that way. And there were even more like fundamental workflow visualization challenges in that. For example, we just had one column called QA review. And you didn't really know what was happening until you had to stand up and you went through every ticket to see if anyone was working on it or not. So we kind of had to like go back to like the very basic tenets of Kanban to really get things moving correctly.
Yeah. So let's start with that. What brought you to Kanban as a potential solution?
Oh man. So little extra context about me. I come from a traditional waterfall project manager background, and I did that for like way too long. And then eventually I fell into the role of a scrum master. I loved it. It was so much fun. But I always kind of felt a little fraudulent in that I had so much problems predicting work and delivery and making things efficient. Like I knew I hated story points. I didn't like them. I didn't like talking about them. I didn't like trying to forecast with them, but I didn't really know of anything better to do. And I was at this company. I was working on this project. It wasn't going well, and we weren't having a good time. And my friend at that company, she was implementing Kanban with her teams. And I watched from afar, and it was just all rainbows and unicorns. The work was predictable. They were happy. They were having fun. Like everyone was jazzed. And I'm over here with like a rain cloud on my head. And I'm just like, you know what? If I ever get the chance, I'm going to learn this Kanban stuff and I am going to try it. And then when I came to this company, I had that opportunity and I pounced on it.
That's awesome. Where did you start your learning journey in terms of?
Oh gosh, this is a funny one. So 2019 was an interesting year to learn Kanban from my perspective. I knew I didn't want to spend thousands of dollars on a certification. Like I just didn't want to do it. So like, I'm like, all right, I'll teach it to myself. Internet wasn't a great place. A lot of the information online was complex, inaccurate, contradictory. YouTube wasn't that much better. So I read that book, Actionable Agile Analytics, like the big tome textbook, and that was great. I only understood like 60% of it the first time I read it. However, I kept at it, and that percentage started to like go up over time. And then I just kind of used the new organization I was at as this experimentation factory for me to try what I was learning, and it ended up working out really well for all of us.
That's awesome. Where was the first start? Like, what was the first couple of things you started with in terms of changing to sprints or changing to what you're rolling out?
Oh my gosh, this is so silly. Yeah. It's so funny, right? Because so one of the challenges I had when I got there was they hadn't actually made any meaningful changes to their process in about 8 months. They just hadn't changed anything. They've been kind of doing that waterfall scrum thing. So there was a lot of resistance over everything. So I just started to like, let's make sure we're accurately visualizing our work. Let's make sure the work is all like, they had some wonky flows where the ticket would go to the right, then it would go back to the left for a little detour, then we'd go to the right. Like, and we have to get everything flowing correctly. And the biggest change management hurdle I had was just to get her to go back to my previous point about that QA review column, was just to get a ready for test column in place. Like that felt like it took mountains to move to get folks just through the first change. And then from there, it got a lot easier.
Yeah. One of the things I think we talked about on our first episode with Nick Brown, we talked a little bit about the fear that can come from that first step. Like you said, just making the work visible. There's a little bit of panic. Like we're pulling the curtains back, we're airing our dirty laundry, and we don't want everybody to be able to see all these problems. Did you run into any resistance just around the visualization aspects of it?
There wasn't a fear of transparency because we were such a scrappy little startup. Like people wanted to get better, but I think there was more fear that like change would make things worse, if that makes any sense. So they're like, I don't know if I want to do this. Like, I don't know, man. Like I'm there. Ultimately, I think the line I said was, like, what do you actually have to lose from this? It was funny. Like it was a ready for test column, and the biggest advocate against it was like a high level engineer. And I said, like you don't even move tickets into this column or not, right? Like how does this actually affect your job? I'm like, come on, let's give it a shot. And I was able to wear them down over time, and we got it in.
Yeah, I feel like, so much of what we're trying to do from a Kanban perspective is running these small experiments, right? And I've kind of used that same tactic over the years of being like, let's just try it, right? If you don't like it, we can go back, right? Or you can go back to doing it the way you were before, but let's give it a chance and see what happens. And hopefully the data, and in your case, the data told a great story at the end. Hopefully that makes the case for you, right? So you don't have to keep trying to convince everybody to change their behavior.
Absolutely. Yeah. Just a couple pilots, some really solid data, I find it just helps change management snowball so hard because you can just keep pointing back to it. And then I like to strategically Jenga the most challenging teams to the end of the stack. And then there's just like this tidal wave of positive vibes. And it's like, yeah, okay, we're going to go along with it.
That's awesome. Well, let's talk about the tooling side of things. So you started with visibility and boards.
Yeah.
What did you have any tooling constraints, or did the tools help you in this journey of starting to make that work more visible for everyone?
So since we were a small shop, and I'd learned this from other companies, one of the first questions I asked was, "Hey, who owns the Atlassian stack? Who owns Jira? Who owns Confluence?" And everyone was like, "Nobody." And I'm like, "Cool, I'll take it." So that helped a lot because I worked at one org where like Jira was ruled with an iron fist, and you ended up having teams defect, and they're like, "We're just going to do our own Trello." So now we're trying to do a release where half the teams are on Jira and half the teams are on Trello, and it's like, no, we can't do that. So every agility lead, myself, are all site admins for our stack of tools here, which is great because we can make rapid configuration changes. To go back to your point though, using that ability allowed me to configure Jira and get the right plugins in place to enable work and process limits, primarily like ConWhip over like a bunch of columns, which was like one of the out of the box Jira's biggest gaps. So I was able to plug that pretty quick, which helped us a lot.
Yeah, that makes a big difference. So it sounds like WIP limits. I was going to ask where you went after visualization. It sounds like maybe WIP limits were next.
Yeah.
Did you meet any resistance around the concept of limiting WIP?
Well, luckily I was like slowly, like I was building my credibility with them. I think there was like, honestly, you talk about fear about WIP limits. I had my own fear and doubts about WIP limits before I implemented them, because besides reading it at a bunch of white papers, I'd never seen it in real life. I'm like, does it really work? Is this like a conspiracy theory? Like, so I had to get through I had to push through myself. And then there was like little tactics I took. Like I started an agile book club. And the book was the Phoenix Project. And I learned I don't really like agile book clubs. So it only lasted until we got WIP limits off the ground. And then
well, enough of these agile books.
And then I had a lot of like conversations with folks on the side to get them ready for the change. And then when we were ready to do the experiment, I pulled everyone in the room and I had curated some fun YouTube videos that showed pull systems with like cute magnets and like restaurant analogies and just whatever I could do to get the point across. And they totally laughed at me. They were like, "You just want us to do less? Like, are you kidding me? Like, that's not going to do anything." Yeah, we'll try it. Yeah. But you know, a few months in, they weren't really laughing anymore. They were pretty happy about it.
Yeah, I mean, WIP limits are, I would love to do something around the psychology of WIP limits, right? Because I think it's such an interesting thing for people to push back on, but I see it every time that people are like, "Well, don't tell me how much work I can do. Like, I'll show you, I'm great at multitasking." And, or I hear that, we'd be happy to limit our WIP, but the organization won't let us, right? They are going to keep pushing work into the system. And so I feel like there's always some resistance around WIP, and it really is like let's just try, like we were just talking about, let's experiment, let's see what happens, and then iterate from there. And if you can get that buy-in initially, I think it makes, all the difference. But there's always, I think WIP limits are one of the hardest things to get.
Oh, I 100% agree with you.
Yeah.
If anyone asked me like how to get this off the ground, I mean, I love the Kanban guide. I really wish I would have had that back when I was doing this, but like getting a definition of workflow, you don't even have to ask permission, get a lot of that stuff checked off and go through there. And I realized that's kind of what I was doing. Like after the definition of workflow came out, I'm like, okay, those were a lot of the documentation steps I took. But yeah, that big hurdle is the WIP limit hurdle. So as much data as you can collect ahead of time to make your case is generally going to aid you, but it's still tough. And then if you talk about portfolio levels, then you take that like times it by like 1 million. It's like so much harder to get the buy. If I'm even after doing WIP limits well at the team for 4 years, 5 years, it still was a challenge to get portfolio WIP limits, like big time.
Yeah. How about so you talked a little bit about how when you were starting your journey in learning Kanban, how much misinformation there was.
Yeah.
It's hard to find kind of a central place to go learn where to start and a simple place to start. When you were starting to roll this out with the teams, did they have misconceptions or unlearning that they had to do, or was this all greenfield? Like, yeah, let's just go.
I luckily it was pretty greenfield for them. They just didn't really understand how it was going to help them, but they were willing. They were at least willing to try it. But I mean, I suffered from the same misinformation as everyone else, right? Oh, Kanban's only good for operations, not for software development. You can't forecast with Kanban, like all the other tropes out there, right? So it's like it's super pervasive. Yeah, but luckily, like no, they didn't really have a strong opinion.
That can be better too. I think now it feels like most of the organizations I work with, they've experienced some flavor of Kanban at some point in their career, whether it's true Kanban or not, right? And we hear a lot of those misconceptions like, oh, well, work can take as long as it takes in Kanban because we don't have a sprint and we don't have a time box to push against. And I'm like, oh no. So it's like the longer it's been around, the more unlearning, I guess, sometimes that has to take place, or kind of reprogramming around what good looks like. And I think that sometimes is much harder than what you're describing, right? Of just starting with teams that are eager to try something different.
And trust me, as we scaled, there was reprogramming and unlearning to happen with new directors or managers or various stakeholders that came into the organization, for sure, especially ones that were like very hardcore, like traditional Scrum types.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the scaling piece, because that's really where I feel like your journey kind of launches, right? Of expanding across platform science. So what was kind of the first indication that you were seeing success at the team level and that you went, okay, like let's keep going up the chain here?
So yeah, so we had the initial team with pilot teams, and that was lovely. And then we quickly scaled that out to all the teams, just like, all right, everybody, let's do this amazing Kanban thing. This is great. But when you're doing Kanban really well at the team level, it starts to highlight other areas of deficiency in your organization, obviously, right? Like portfolio management, or in my case, a lack of portfolio management. I mean, it's great we're limiting our tasks, but if you have like twice as many projects and initiatives as you have engineers on your staff, you're going to have a bad time. We were having a bad time. We were having a very bad time. And it was a long journey for us. There was a lot of different approaches and trial and error, especially since I was like teaching myself everything, like trying to like grapple with portfolio management and how to properly visualize and scale an R&D organization with hundreds of folks was like super difficult. We tried a number of different tools. We even got to the point where we threw it all in a spreadsheet. So the spreadsheet had like 90 rows of large work items in it, 20 columns of teams and checkboxes on dependencies and different cadences for it. And yeah, it was tough. It wasn't until like 2 years ago, Jira Product Discovery came out. And I was asked, hey, VP of Product said, hey, I bought this thing. I had a nice like enhancement, like customer enhancement request process. And he's like, hey, can you replace it with there? And I'm like, yeah, let me do a bunch of other stuff with it too. And that was kind of my opportunity point to kind of really get this dialed in.
Yeah, and you said a few things there that I think are so important and so true, right? We can be making great strides to roll Kanban out at the team level and see WIP limits in effect. But it's like, if you're still working on 50 different features, the WIP limits of the team really aren't going to help you get stuff over the finish line any faster, right? It's kind of death by a thousand cuts at that point. You might be speeding up cycle time for your stories or cycle time for your tickets, but it's like the features still aren't getting done because your focus is spread so thin at that portfolio layer. So I think it's a pretty common problem. How about at that level in terms of resistance? Was WIP? You mentioned WIP earlier. Was WIP one of the biggest things that you got pushback on?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I'm just laughing because it's such a mountain to climb. Like it was like just the gap between team to portfolio I'm just thinking about it right now, how nuts it was. But yeah, lots of pushback. Yeah. I had to really take it back to like just the basics though. It was like, all right, I need to build my case here. I don't have the data. I need to build a case. To do that, I have to have a coherent operational portfolio with a set of data to make my case. So I've got to do that first. So I mentioned JPD. All I did with JPD was I built that high level portfolio view from idea, discovery, planning, execution, deployment to value delivery, the highest level possible, just zoomed us out, picked some pilot teams, got them to go in there. They loved it because they could see what they were working on. We had an ability to extrapolate dependencies at that level, which they loved, and it gave them great visibility. Kept same concept, pilots, momentum, got everyone else doing it. Hey, this is great. I can see all these dependencies coming in. This is so cool. And I'm like, all right, this is great. Everyone's using my system now. I mean, that was like a year unto itself just to get all these teams using the system. And then I just kind of let them work. And I just collected my quietly just let my aging tick up. I let my WIP pile up. I let all my data come. And I waited for folks to come to me with more tactical level pain points, which obviously came. I mean, it was great that we could see the dependencies coming, but like it was clear that the system was overloaded. And then I just took the data and wrote a really direct one pager that outlined the data challenges, a lot of qualitative pain our folks were having. And it gave me the buy-in I needed it was actually great. My VP of product actually set an OKR. The OKR was finish more than we start. I'm like, all right, that's good. And then it let me pick some portfolio WIP teams to get that rolling out with. And yeah, it's kind of just was super positive from there, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I mean, the portfolio level is my favorite place in the organization to apply Kanban because it makes such a big impact pretty quickly once you start getting all of these things in motion. But I think, like you said, the first step there around the visibility, I think also starts to uncover just a lot of, I guess, misconceptions about what's really taking place. I worked for this one company where the VP of marketing kind of had a bad rap for always coming and derailing priorities, right? Honestly, it was like every time we had our monthly roadmap steering conversation, he would come with a new list of ideas and a new set of priorities that were different than what we talked about last month and all urgent. Yeah. And everybody would get really frustrated with him. But once we had our portfolio system in place, we were able to say, we know you have this great idea that, or that somebody, a customer asked for last night. Look at what's currently in progress. Look at how close these things are to finishing and how long they've been in progress. And then tell us do you want us to stop work on any of these items to pick up this new idea? And
love it.
Honestly, some of the time the answer was yes, which is a different pain in the ass, but but that's okay, right? At least then we're making an educated decision about those trade-offs of starting the new work and not finishing something else. And I think before we got to that point, we weren't really able to have a very educated conversation about it because we couldn't see the trade-offs. So it was just go start this new thing all the time because we couldn't see what the impact of starting that new work was, like you were saying. So
I love that. Yeah. I've we got a lot of stakeholders that can inject various things into our systems too. We've actually created a formal escalation process for those types of injections within Jira Product Discovery. So there's a simple field in a box folks click, it triggers some alerts and kind of kicks off a formal process where product actually has the breathing room to analyze the trade-offs versus their roadmap and kind of convey that to the stakeholders and have those conversations asynchronously. Yeah, it's so great, isn't it? Yeah.
Tell us more about this paper that you wrote. It sounds like you got good momentum with the organization with whatever you had in there. What you said there was some data and some metrics. What else was it?
There were, yeah. So there was a lot of pain and challenges with delivery and a lot of WIP. And the symptomatic problems might tell you that there wasn't enough project management happening. At least that's what was happening. And I was like, well, that's one way to interpret it. But actually, if you kind of pull the onion back and you go deeper into it, you're going to see that we start like hundreds of X% more than we finish. And items are taking a very long time to get through the system. Here's some citations. Here's some quotes from some, like I was quoting the Phoenix Project. I was quoting various books. I was giving quotes from our own leaders on their own delivery challenges that they put in. We do like a quarterly health check where we just kind of check in with the teams on the survey. So I had some good data points and quotes from there. And it was like the main crux of it was, we have too much WIP. I know how to solve it. Let me solve it. I will fix this for you. And it was a very, very passionate type of doc, and it got the point across, and they gave me the go ahead to run the pilot.
That's awesome. Yeah. At that portfolio level, did you end up creating like portfolio level stand-ups or portfolio level reviews of the board itself, or did that fold into things that already existed?
We actually had a session that we've been running for a while where it was kind of like a manager type. It was kind of like a manager update meeting. I'm not a fan of the traditional scrum of scrums, to be honest with you. But I was always trying to find like a flavor of that worked. But once I had the Jira product discovery board up and running, I was able to create a board that just showed work items with dependencies. And then, I turned that into a scaled stand-up. So every other week, you get the managers in there. I'm walking the board. We're talking, what are the most important things about these items? What are at risk? We have various indicators and whatnot. And that got really smooth. I got that 50-person manager portfolio meeting like down to like a 15-minute biweekly meeting. And actually, it's so funny. Recently, a couple of weeks ago, actually, it's like hot off the presses. We decided that it was so effective and we're so dialed in with each other that we don't need it anymore. We've taken it completely asynchronous now. So we don't even do the portfolio stand up anymore. But my challenge to my team was, I'm like, okay, we can get rid of this, but there are two questions we need to ask ourselves every time we're meeting with our leads. And that is, are the dependencies we owe to other teams visualized on our portfolio board? And is the work we expect from other teams, is it visualized on their board? And actually, as soon as I started implementing that policy, I was catching things that weren't even coming up in the stand-up. It was fantastic. So that's kind of how that evolved.
Yeah, let's talk dependencies more. I want to go down that road because when you start talking portfolio, right? That's where I don't know, maybe like a lot of the overhead from Scrum or Safe, all kind of boils down to how we manage our dependencies. And I think a big part of what we want to try to do from a Kanban perspective is just eliminate those dependencies entirely. Like tracking them, visualizing them, tracking them is step one. But did you make any changes to team structure or how work moved as a result of identifying those dependencies or being able to see them on the boards?
We've made definitely headcount changes and like augmented different departments to help with that. As far as fundamental changes to structure, since we're such a rapidly growing company, I mean, like we're growing really quick. Those kind of come naturally anyway. We're like the charters are always being reevaluated. The teams are always being reconfigured to the chagrin of my tooling guy because he has to rekey all of the Jira stuff. He does not like team name changes. But like, it does inform our team design and if we're overloading various teams from a dependency perspective. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, let's talk. So we talked a little bit about the metrics that you use to get buy-in. Now you talked about WIP, getting WIP off the ground, and a little bit about work item age at the portfolio level. Did you ever set any SLEs at the portfolio level or at the?
Oh yeah, I've said it. Yeah, that's an excellent question. Part of the pilot. So we do like we do the classic quarterly roadmap planning, product presents every 90 days. And I'm like, all right, well, if these are portfolio items, maybe we should deliver them in 90 days or less. So that's the right size SLE target for the items. And a lot of these teams, when I started working with them on portfolio WIP limits, let me look at some of these, like 132 days, 210 days, 95 days. Like, there was a lot of room for improvement from an SLE perspective. So absolutely. That was like my two KPIs for the WIP was a target around cycle time, and then obviously active item aging or item aging management to ensure that you're on track for that. You're having those right conversations. And then I love the CFD. I love the average of starting versus finishing to ensure that I don't have like a big chunky CFD. So, and we were like, it was super chunky here. So ensuring that we had a stable system and stable parity there were kind of the two primary indicators that we track for it.
Yeah. I mean, what you just said about features and the feature right sizing, feature SLE and cycle time, I think is so prevalent and so rarely looked at. It's really unfortunate because, like we said, so much focus from whether you're doing Scrum, Kanban, whatever practices, no practices, so much of the management of work is focused at the team level. But then we have these features, like you just said, you're doing planning every 90 days, but the features are taking more than 2 quarters to complete. It's like, okay, well then why are we still planning every quarter if we still have all this work in flight from the last quarter? And it's just this perpetual cycle where, I mean, you could even, I think, draw some parallels to sprint time boxes, right? When we start looking at the quarter there of pushing new work in because of the calendar instead of because of the capacity to pull. So I'm curious, it sounds like you went asynchronous with some of those conversations, but how did it change that planning cycle for your organization?
Honestly, everything is kind of like changing and in flux as of right now, because we've entered a merger right now, as a couple weeks ago. So we like scaled like rapidly. So those cadences are largely a lot of these cadences are being reassessed, to be honest with you. But I could see an evolution to that as we kind of settle on what's there. But at the end of the day, it's funny, like we can be super flow oriented, but if a lot of business stakeholders and a lot of business like folks still, it's funny, they still function on that like traditional quarterly cadence. But the beauty of a flow system is like, all right, if that's a constraint and that's off the table, we can't change that. Well, I can at least plan around that really darn easy, because I know what work is coming like just months and months in advance with my with an optimized system.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. How about do you guys have to deal with hardware schedules too, or is this mostly all on the software side?
Oh, there's definitely hardware scheduling that happens. We've got various operations teams and supply chain teams that coordinate with our agile hardware teams for those sorts of things.
Did you hear any feedback from your customers in terms of changes to customer satisfaction, or how long it was taking before versus after you implemented all of this to get the work?
It's interesting. Internal customers, yes. External customers, because of the nature of our business, we have to still get them to accept releases. And there's like that's like a whole separate can of worms there. So from that perspective, they're getting more things faster. So I know there's satisfaction there, but there's still some interesting kind of just challenges on the industry and releasing in general.
Yeah, that's funny. I feel like when you think about maybe some of the unexpected benefits, right? I've been in organizations where they've all of a sudden said, "Oh, now we're releasing too fast," right? Are we getting stuff to the customer quickly? I worked with one company where the marketing team was actually fairly removed, I think, from a lot of the planning cycles and a lot of the, just the portfolio visualization of the work. Mm-hmm. And they were like, we can't handle the marketing of all of these things coming through so much faster now. So it worked out great. It was not the intent at the beginning of the portfolio rollout, but we ended up pulling the marketing team into the portfolio Kanban workflow so that we weren't pushing so much work to marketing that they couldn't keep pace with the features rolling out. And so it was kind of a nice full cycle loop there to be able to say, okay, now marketing is going to pull features from when they're deployed, when they're ready to launch those features into production or announce those features to our customers, so that we're not overwhelming that part of the system. So
I love that.
Yeah. Portfolio kept growing.
It never ends. It really never ends. Like there's this just infinite optimization of pipeline, like seemingly infinite, I suppose.
Yeah, no, it totally is. And it's, we somebody had asked a question in the Slack, I think earlier this week or last week, around where to start with portfolio and how big to go and how wide to go. And, I think like you're describing with your journey, it's like start somewhere, right? Start to visualize what you have right now. So that you can see how much work is in flight, and then you'll start to see it grow on its own, right? And it's up and down and it's wide, and there isn't really a right or wrong way to do this, but it's like the more you start to see the impact it's having on other parts of the business, the easier it is to get that buy-in. And that thinking about how marketing folds into that is a great example of that, because we might not consider typically marketing part of that portfolio workflow until all of a sudden we're pushing stuff too fast to them, right? And they're overloaded. They're the bulge in the CFD that you were describing. Yep, absolutely. You're like, slow down. Well, let's talk, I guess, looking back now on all of this. It's been, you said, a 6-year journey here. What would you do differently if you were starting your journey today?
I would say, hey, dude, there's going to be this thing called Pro Kanban. It's going to come out in about a year after you get started. You should definitely look at them in 2020 instead of 2023 or 24, whenever you found out about them, because it would make your life a lot easier. That's probably.
We were just a little too late. We were working on it. We didn't tell anybody yet.
There was so funny, right? Like, I remember I was teaching it to myself. I was in the Mike Cohn forums, and Daniel Vacanti was doing a Q&A, and it was like 2019. I'm like, hi Daniel, this Monte Carlo stuff's pretty cool. Is there any communities or anywhere that talks about these things, like a Slack or something? And yeah, and it was like, no, not yet. And I'm like, oh, I can't wait. Yeah, I love the Pro Kanban Slack. Like, there's so much good stuff in there.
So technically, maybe you gave him the idea. Sounds like.
Maybe. I don't know.
So when you mentioned Monte Carlo, we didn't talk about that at all. Or is that something that you're using at the portfolio level as well?
Honestly, at the portfolio level, because of how I've extrapolated things with portfolio items, I'm able to just use a simple scatter plot for those, for right sizing and helping with there. I don't really do MCs at that level on a portfolio item. I still tend to coach teams to do it on kind of like your lowest common denominator. So like your task or story, and what is that range that would add up to there. But we do use Monte Carlo quite a bit. I've got all of our teams use them for iteration planning, and I've kind of got a template for them to be able to plan their sprints and then do like a midway checkpoint. I love Monte Carlo, but you got to be really good at modeling. It can really bite you. It can really bite you hard. Yeah.
Well, and you have to have that system stability in place, right?
Oh,
to have
course,
confidence in that Monte Carlo in the first place. And I think that's where we see a lot of companies kind of jump straight to that, to the Monte Carlo side of things. And it's like, then we go look at their scatter plots and we're like, your Monte Carlo is probably going to change every time you rerun it by a big jumps up and down, because there's so much variability in your individual work item data. And that's going to get reflected here, or in, a lot of variability in your WIP too can have a big impact on that. So really focusing on system stability is going to be kind of the precursor to having any confidence in that Monte Carlo in the first place.
Yeah, fully agree.
Yeah. Well, what's next? So it sounds like, you've made huge strides, team level, portfolio level. What are the things that you're kind of envisioning next on the journey for?
I'm talking about trying to get buy-in for a strategic portfolio, to be able to connect strategy to the operations that we're doing and to have properly written goal measurable outcomes. I think that's huge. And I want to get buy-in for that. As far as portfolio Kanban, we have lots of opportunities going upstream in the pipeline. Like our discovery and planning states are not optimized at all. So I think that's some low-hanging fruit there. And then, we just went from 300 to 1,200 people. So I'm probably going to be pretty busy doing a lot of merger work with these new organizations and seeing what they're doing great, showing them some of our portfolio work, and helping to ensure that we're staying productive and supportive.
Yeah, as you start to expand with the new companies and all the new teams that are going to be folding into the mix, do you will you be the one going to work with all those teams, or does it, and then what happens to the teams that are up and running well? Do you have somebody on those teams, like a team lead or somebody who kind of you can pass the torch to, and they carry these practices forward so you don't have to worry?
Yeah, I've got someone who's really great, who I think could step into that role for my home org. But yeah, I'd be working a lot with these other ones, and then probably expanding a team. I've kind of evolved past the I don't really do Scrum Masters anymore. Like, we've kind of rebranded, especially with the portfolio management. I have them focusing more at that level, and also supporting the teams too. But like, for the most part, day-to-day team stuff, like I trust our team leads to handle that stuff. And yeah, I've got a good handle on the model. It's just I'll definitely be hiring. Let's just say that.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard. It's hard to roll a lot of change out all at the same time, and then also feel like you're not abandoning the teams that are working well, or that you might still want to make sure that they're reviewing their metrics and having conversations about their workflow and keeping that ball rolling. Because I feel like without somebody to champion that, it's easy to just fall back into old practices.
100%. 100%. Yeah. No, I totally agree with you there.
Well, I want to get to questions from the folks that are live and listening in. So if you want to start posting questions here, feel free. I have a couple questions, I guess, as we're waiting for some of those to roll in. So if from a personal perspective, how has Kanban changed the way that you think about work or priorities? And how you would
approach so much.
A little bit before we started about children.
Yeah, like let's talk about Kanban in my life. I see queues everywhere. I go to the grocery store, I see a queue. I go to Starbucks, I see queues. I've my wife and I have a Trello board. We have a baby coming in April. We've got like columns for trimesters with work items that we're assigning to each other. I get assigned tasks at home. I'm like, okay, well, I don't want to multitask those. I need to stack these as efficiently as possible. Yeah, especially with my toddler in the morning, getting him to school or preschool, right? It's like a whole series of repeatable activities that I think about there. So yeah, I think about it to an annoying degree. At least that's what my wife would say.
Janae and I are working on some aging work in progress onesies. So I'll have to give you one of those your direction.
Nice.
But it's interesting. I totally agree with you. It's like I think you probably see the inefficiencies even maybe more than the things that work well, once you start thinking in this way and about pull systems, about cues, all the stuff you're talking about around how you can make things better in all these different places. And it's like, we tend to think about all of this in application for knowledge work, but there's so much opportunity here to apply it outside of things like that too. And, I think it's fun to be able to use it at home. You're not the first person I've heard say that they've used a board. We talked to somebody last year who used a board for wedding planning. And and I was like, oh, that, they were trying to plan their wedding and didn't have a wedding planner. So they used a Kanban system. And the person we were interviewing said that he used the WIP limits more to manage his future mother-in-law than to manage which I thought was pretty funny.
That's awesome.
Well, let's see here. So let's talk a little bit about, so you talked about kind of what's next and how this has changed some things for you. If you could summarize this whole journey in kind of one sentence, Jack, what would it be?
That's a good question. Kanban is a visualization until it shows you everything that's been holding you back.
Yeah. Tell us more about the holding you back part.
I always had like big dreams at companies. I was always just kind of like a line level Scrum Master. And I always wanted more. And I feel like Kanban was really the big pivotal point in my career in like what's accelerated me and accelerated my success, accelerated the happiness and growth in my family. And even from like that's like my own personal belief, but from like a work perspective too, it shows you everything that is holding your team back. Like, what are the things that is keeping us from getting to that beautiful end state for our customers? How do we make work as smoothly as possible? And then even when you think like we were really feeling ourselves when we got that team Kanban moving, but you know what? It like you find out that that's just a little hill you went over and there's giant mountains ahead of you. So yeah, it really just unlocks so much endless possibility and personal and professional growth in my view.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, my journey was very similar. I started out in QA and then became a Scrum Master, and I always joke that I felt a lot like the team mom. All the stuff you were saying at the beginning about being like, I don't really love a lot of the stuff I'm making you guys do, or I don't really believe that this is the right use of everybody's time. I think it's hard. It's a hard spot to work from, and it's hard to, I don't know, encourage everybody to be like, yes, we're going to sit in this room and story point for an hour and a half. When you're like, I know you have so much other stuff to do that's probably a lot more important than having a conversation about this story for the third week in a row. So I had kind of a similar experience. It was like once I started learning more about Kanban, I was so excited because I felt like it really unlocked things and took me out of that seat of feeling like the team mom, and really gave me a chance to show everybody with the data what, it was like, I don't have to tell you this is working or not working. Here's the numbers. This has nothing to do with me. You're not going to hurt my feeling in either way, but here's the evidence of whether or not these practices are actually helping you deliver more.
Absolutely. And it's so tangible. It's so empirical, right? Like you can actually like what the number one criticism for agility, big agile, our whole industry is that like we can't see the improvements. Oh, it's so hard to measure a Scrum Master's improvements, blah, blah, blah. Like, no, it's really not. It's actually really easy. Just right there, just grab it. Yeah. So
I guess that's an interesting question. You talked a little bit about scaling and merging these organizations and hiring to help with team coaches. Well, metrics and understanding flow metrics and how to track the efficiency of the stuff that you're doing be a part of what you look for in candidates?
It always is. It's I mean, when I start looking for, I find it's interesting. It is like actionable agile, and like a lot of books are like assigned reading for anyone that works for me and my team. And it's weird though, because I find that like folks that have less traditional Scrum, less traditional agility experience kind of take to it a lot faster and pick it up and implement it, versus more tenured folks that have been working the other way for a very long time.
Yeah.
But yeah, ideally going forward, folks already know this stuff before they come in. But I'm no stranger to teaching it.
Yeah, it's kind of like what we were talking about at the team level, right? Of that unlearning pattern can sometimes be harder of trying to backtrack from stuff that you've been taught.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're hitting a connectivity thing. Hello?
I feel like my connection's kind of going in and out here. I apologize.
That's okay. I can hear you.
Can you still hear me?
I can totally hear you.
Yeah, I've got. I can hear you again. Let's see.
Okay.
Can you still hear me, Jack?
I totally can. Can you hear me? I turned my camera off if that helps. All right, I guess we got some technical difficulties right now. I think Colleen's going to rejoin. If anyone does have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat while I'm still here.
Hi, folks. We do seem to have some technical difficulties. If you do have any questions as you're watching it as a recording or right now, put them in the chat, and what we can do is Jack and Colin can reply to them afterwards as well. The comments are going to be there on LinkedIn if you need them. They will be available afterwards as well. So it looks like we hit some Wi-Fi challenges, but thank you so much, Jack, for joining us. Oh, Colin's back.
Thank you.
Another chance.
There we go. I'm so sorry. I'm not sure what's going on with my Wi-Fi. I apologize. Jack, thank you so much for joining us today. I don't know if my last question went through, but if people want to hear more about the work you've done or connect with you after the show, where can they find you?
That's the funny thing. I'm just kind of a dad who likes Kanban, so I don't have a blog or anything, but if you want to connect, send me a DM on LinkedIn, or you can connect with me. I love as I mentioned, the Pro Kanban Slack, so I check messages there. So feel free to hit me up. And Mel, I see you in the chat. Thanks for making it.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining us today, Jack. And sorry for the technical difficulties here at the end on my end. I'm not sure what's going on, but
no problem.
thank you all for joining us today. And we hope you found some inspiration and some practical takeaways from everything that Jack shared today. Our next episode 3, will be March 11th, and we'll be talking with Nate Lucier, who leveraged Kanban to unlock alignment, visibility, and predictability at a fragmented healthcare portfolio. So he'll be sharing more similar stories to what we were talking about today about scaling and bringing the portfolio view together here. So you won't want to miss it. Join us again on March 11th. And if you have a story about how Kanban's helped your team or organization achieve something extraordinary, we'd love to hear from you too. You can reach out to us in Slack, like Jack talked about, or on LinkedIn. And we'd love to have you share your journey here to help inspire others too. So